It's Friday, October the 10th, 2014, and we're talking to Caroline Otley. Caroline, I think you're the first person that we've talked to so far who was actually born in the village, and you were born in this house?
I was born in St Luke's in Guildford, but obviously I've lived here since I was born.
So, what are your memories of this house?
The house, for me, was very cold, and I can remember as a child picking ice from the inside of the windows because the only heating we had was the coal fire in the front room. We had fireplaces in the bedrooms, but they were only ever lit, I believe, because of probably cost and everything. If we were poorly, we had the luxury of having an open fire in our bedroom. But the fire was lit in the living room every morning, and it was the warmest place, but our bedrooms were very, very cold. And I can remember picking the ice, as I say, from the windows.
Who lit the fire?
It was either, as we got older, Mum and Dad always lit the fire, but whoever was there first, really, because I can remember lighting a fire if it was cold when I come home from school and things like that. You know, we were all taught how to light the fire, and not by, you know, firelighters or anything like that, the old method of screwing newspapers up, kindling that we would have collected, and lighting it from there. But it was, you just learnt, and you did it even from an early age, you know.
Did you all go out and collect the kindling?
Yeah, we used to. We used to walk a lot around the village then, not many cars or anything like that. But we did used to do things like that together as a family, yeah. So,
how's the house changed?
From my memories, early memories of the house, was the biggest thing being the coal house outside, but the outside toilet. Having a bathroom, but not having running hot water in the bathroom. So we used to Mum used to do all our baths once a week in the copper, where we shared baths, things like that. Shared the water because of filling it up. It was very, very much smaller than it is now, and quite cold. I can remember, you know, wanting the fire lit and racing, and I can also remember dragging clothes on me to get dressed in bed because it was so cold.
Oh, you went to school
Good,
with a night dress on,
you know,
to her clothes once you forgot to take it off.
And sort of getting my clothes laid out at night and then pulling them in the morning to try and get dressed whilst I was in bed.
Can you remember what the bedclothes were like?
Yeah, we always seemed to have, and I know this might sound strange, but we had blankets and an eiderdown on the top. But often, if it got really cold, we used to have my dad's overcoats and things put on top of the bed as well to keep warm, and things like that. Never heard of now, of putting coats on the beds to keep warm, but that's what we used to do, and I have memories of that. Yeah.
Do you remember any structural changes in the house, or was that done before you were born?
No, I can remember, because we didn't have running water for quite a long time. I think I was probably 11 or 12 when we were asked to move out of here while they put main drainage into the village, into this row of houses here. I was 12 because I was just starting secondary school, and we moved to West Clarendon to the council properties called the Glebe, and we stayed there for a year while they were doing the main drainage here and upgrading certain things. I believe there was new roof tiles, things like that, that were done in the house. Changes, we had 2 doors in here and a tiny little lobby from the front door, and things were changed. There was supposed to be a more modernised kitchen and bathroom, but I don't remember it being very much different than it was, apart from the fact was the inside toilet that was brought in. So there was that. because you used to walk into a porch and the toilet was on the right and then you came in the back door. so it was outside. But we did do that, moved out for a year and so forth.
Very rude and say, when were you born?
I was born in 1961.
So it was the early 70s when this house was renovated.
Yes, yeah. So, but I do remember it very, very well, and digging out the gardens. The other memory of here was, as you see our front garden today, is lawn and flowers. It was always that as children, but the back garden is completely transformed because you had a tiny area of lawn and the rest was vegetables, which is what you needed. I mean, as a child, I had a fantastic, loving childhood, no problem. But obviously, I think for money reasons and things, you grew your own vegetables, and Mum did a really good job of doing that. And
she grew the vegetables?
Yes, Mum did the vegetables, and in my current job now was inspired, and interested in gardening from a very young age because of my mother.
So what do you do?
So now I landscape garden and design and so forth. So, but it was from a very early age.
And did you help in the garden?
Yes, always. I used to mow grass then when you had the small rotating push lawnmowers. Often used to help Mum by going up and down there doing the grass. But the front garden was what everybody saw was a very pretty, pristine garden, and Mum has always kept it as such. It's always been, if we ever had family photos, you'll find they're always in the front garden and not at the back because of the vegetables.
So what did you grow in the back garden, the vegetables?
Oh, we had all sorts, mainly potatoes, cabbages, I can remember. All manner of vegetables. Never ever remember, because we didn't have a greenhouse, we never grew things like tomatoes and things, but it was runner beans, broad beans, sprouts, cabbage, potatoes. Good, green vegetables.
Wonderful.
And carrots, things like that. But I don't remember my mum now is growing asparagus, but that would not have been grown when I was younger, because that's not what we needed. It's a luxury and so forth. But yeah.
Brilliant. And you went to school in the village?
Yes, I couldn't wait. I had 3 older brothers and I could not wait to get to school. And in fact, I went to school almost a year earlier than I should have. Whether it was talking to them, I don't know how it came about, but I did. I started and was there with 2 of my older brothers, not my oldest brother, but my other 2 brothers. And I have very fond memories of the school. We used to get into trouble for picking walnuts on the way to school, and we used to have our hands checked for walnut stains before we went in. So it's
the trees that are now in the play park.
It was, yes, along the edge of there we used to pick the fresh walnuts. They were gorgeous too, but we did used to get told off for doing that in the school. And Miss Mould was quite a head teacher that was very formidable. She was very, very strict. I remember still if you were naughty or did anything. I never ever remember being caned or ruler or anything like that at school, but we did still have the dunce's hat when I was at school, at the Clarendon Primary. You did get put in a corner, and you did if you had done something wrong. But Miss Napkin was the teacher I remember the most.
What did she look like?
She was she had light, when I first started, she had light blonde hair, she wore glasses, she was a very bubbly character. Whilst I was there, she did marry, and I can't remember her name before the Napkin, was her married name. But she was a very lovely lady.
Was there just one teacher at a time at the school?
There were 2 classes, so there was one teacher, so it's Mrs. Napkin and Miss Mould, I remember. And she was, I think because Mrs. Napkin was younger, she seemed to be more easygoing, not quite so strict. And the dreaded thing of being at school for me and Caroline, who lived next door, who I grew up with, was the toilets at the school. They were pitch black. They used to have to go up some steps. They had wooden seats and they were tin. There was no lights in there. It was a horrible place to go into. It really was scary. Boys used to love making you think it was the scariest place on earth. And so you used to try and avoid it, avoid going to the toilet most of the time because it was horrible there until you got home and so forth. But
was there just one?
It was 3 in one building, 3 in the one little building there.
One for the boys and one for the girls?
But in the other, well, in one playground, in the front playground nearest the churchyard was the infants' playground, and at the back was the juniors, and they had a little block which was a stone building, which I believe is still there, at the school, and that was their toilets. So we used to.
Did you have separate classrooms?
They were just the 2, I remember, 2 separate classrooms. Infants and juniors. Yeah. Do
you remember any of the lessons?
Little bit. I can remember nature walks and having nature tables where you were allowed to bring things in and talk to the class about them. So if you'd done things over the weekend and so forth. But there was a lot of naturist things that we did there. We were heavily involved with, the school was involved with the church, and that's where I started to have my interest in the church. We had proper prayers at the beginning of the day, proper prayers when we left to end the day. We always said prayers before food, before lunch, and so forth. And I loved the hot food, but I didn't always love the fact that you had to finish your meal.
Yes.
You were never allowed to leave a scrap on your plate. So beetroot was my hate, and you had to eat it, and I can't eat it now.
But was it decent food?
It was hot. I think the fact that we had nice hot food, I liked it, and I can remember liking it.
Cooked on the premises,
yes,
I suppose.
It was. There was a tiny kitchen, and it was cooked there, and I liked that as a child.
When Will would eat his carrots.
But you couldn't, as I say, you couldn't leave any food. You always had to eat everything, always.
Naughty children did.
No, I have good memories of that. Lessons and things, I remember doing times tables and things and learning that very repetitively, and we used to have to learn it forwards and backwards. But you said it in a very, I don't know what the word you'd say, but a regimented fashion, 2 2's are 2, and it was almost like singing it and so forth. And remembering things like that.
Did you go in up those steep steps? Or if you go up
at the side of
School Lane,
in the lane,
there are steep steps which are very worn away. Is that the way you
No,
went
that
in?
was where the kitchen was. There, that door. That is the original door that I still remember. That hasn't changed. But we used to go round through into the playground and then through a middle door into the school. I don't ever remember going up those steps.
And you say that you remember the church and being involved with the church. You sang in the choir, I think, didn't you?
Yes, I sang in the choir from when I was about 7 years old, 7 or 8. I was at school with the vicar's daughter, Helen. She was the same age as me, Peter Taylor's daughter. And I started quite early singing because of singing at school and the involvement and so forth. And we used to have, we used to get paid to sing in the choir. We used to have, I think my wage was something like 30p or something, but it was, it was given in a little brown envelope that you used to have. And if we sang at weddings and things, we used to get, also used to get paid.
How many of you?
When I was in the choir, both of the stalls would have been full. So you're talking of quite a lot. We had sopranos, altos, and tenors, I think. But we didn't. But it was full. There was a lot of people in there.
So who ran the choir?
Mrs. May, Sue May, ran the choir. A lovely lady that lived in West Clarendon. She was great, you know. I mean, she was very encouraging, because when Clarendon School closed and we all had to go to West Clarendon School, she used to run the choir and did things for Christmas plays and things like that. And so she was very encouraging with the singing. And I used to go round to her house for lessons and so forth.
So when did the school close here?
I can remember, I can't remember the exact date or year, but I must have gone into the second, so I started, it must have been when I was about 7 or 8. Or even
As young as that?
Yeah, well,
That must have been hard. How did you get to school in West Clarendon?
We had a rickety old bus that used to come into the village and collect us. We used to have to walk down to stand opposite the pub, and it would pick you up from there and so forth. We used to go to West Clarendon, and that was quite hard. That was because it was a lovely small school, and this school seemed much bigger, so it was quite a hard transformation.
Can you remember how many children there were here when the school closed?
There must have been. There wasn't a huge amount, because I think other people went to different schools, but to go from east to west, there must have been about 15 of us, you know, in that region, because it was a little sort of, it was bigger than a minibus, a small coach that we used to have. So there must have been 15, maybe more, but I can't really remember. Because you did have Lantford Cross then, which is Cherry Trees now. The children from the home, children's home.
And do you remember the change to the road here? What difference did that make to you?
That made noise level and things, but danger really, I think, because there was accidents where cars actually ended up on the front lawn of the next door neighbour and just missing the house, because people used to travel quite fast along there, and often there would be dents in people's hedges where cars had actually come off the road into the front gardens. So I do remember that. Not many people who lived here had cars, you know, here. I think probably 2 or 3 had cars up here. But the other, with the road and things that were changing here, I think it was the making it safe, you know, because being as that was your own, mostly your garden out the front with lawn for children to play, it was quite dangerous, really, because of the cars. But here, living here, when you say about community and so forth, the thing I remember here, although this may not have been included within the actual village, the 12 houses here, everybody knew each other. And one lady had a telephone, and this wouldn't happen nowadays, but if you wanted someone to contact you, you always gave this lady's telephone number. She would run down from her house and come and get you, and then you'd go up there and answer the phone. If you needed a doctor, you would go up there. You could go in and out of Mrs. Turner's house and just leave money by the phone and use the phone. And she allowed that. I mean, it wouldn't happen nowadays. She wouldn't let strangers come into your... But she always did, and she was the only person that had a telephone out of the 12 houses. If there was older people, we would often take a bucket of coal or something to an old lady, Mrs. Woolidge, that lived in number 12. You were often told as children, go make sure she's okay, you know, and things like that. And that did happen here, not so much in the village, but within these cottages it did. And the biggest thing in the village was, as children, was remembering the policeman. We had a policeman around the village the whole time. So whenever you were out on your bikes or playing as children, and, you know, because we did play in the village a lot and around the ponds and in Hatchlands Lake and things like that, they were all our play areas, and scrumping and so forth that we used to do. There was always a village policeman that would say, you know, I used to like getting on the back of my brother's bike, and you were never allowed to ride the bike on the pavement, and he would often tell you off, sometimes giving you a clip round the ear.
Where did he live?
I don't know where he lived, but he was always in the village. We had this village policeman, and if you're ever doing anything you shouldn't be doing, I mean, not that it was never grotesquely wrong things, but maybe going knocking on someone's door or something like that, and running away and doing things like that we did as children. We used to make. We had apple fights in the wreck there, often, using the huge slide that we had there as where we used to launch all the apples at other people, other children, and have things.
So were there a lot of children in the village?
Yeah, there were, because I think Lampford Cross, we were, I remember Lampford Cross a lot, and I used to go in there a lot and befriended a lot of people there. But Aunt Hester, who ran, if you were ever called in front of Aunt Hester, you knew you were in trouble.
Who was she?
She was the lady that ran the home.
And what was she like?
She was a lovely lady, but you were scared stiff of her. If she said she was going to tell your parents because you'd been doing something wrong, then you were extremely worried. But she would tell you off. You would listen and respect everything.
What did she look like?
She said she was a lovely. She always wore her hair in a bun on her head. She had a little. I always remember on her glasses. She had like half glasses and this little pimple on her cheek. But she would praise you equally if you'd done something right. Always in church she was. But she would tell you off also, you know. But then I think that is something that has changed, because people knew that they could tell you off if you did something. There was a lady who lived, it used to be 2 cottages opposite the church, Mrs. Illing, who I remember, who wasn't a lady that loved children. And so if you were riding past her house too many times, things like that, she would often tell you off and so forth. But you were never rude to her.
So this church cottage was 2 cottages?
It's the one that's got the wishing well out the front, yes, right there. That used to be 2 cottages, and Mrs. Illing used to live in one. I don't know who lived in the other one, I can't remember. There was a cottage further down the lane as well that we used to, an old lady lived in that we used to think was a witch as children. And I can't remember who she was, but we always rode our bikes with a wide path round this cottage because we believed her to be a witch.
Goodness.
She must have shouted at us.
Which cottage would that have
It was
been?
a white cottage opposite, it was, you go past the church, turn left, and you go straight down, and there was a white cottage on the left-hand side, opposite. I think there's big wrought iron gates now, opposite into.
Opposite Tunmore?
Yes, around there, and it was a white cottage there that we used to try and avoid because we were scared. But
wonderful.
Yeah, because it was a lonely village, but we did spend all our childhood in and around the village.
And it was safe because there was no traffic?
No. And we were often, you know, ride bikes, make go-karts to go up the hill. I mean, it's extremely dangerous, but we used to do things like that. Always managing to find pram wheels from where, I never know. But we always did to build our go-karts and things. But
and you'd come down Staple Lane?
Yeah. I mean, it's horrendous when you think now, but we used to. I had 3 older brothers, so I had quite a tomboyish existence, apart from the church. The church is the only time I was away from my brothers. So, and so forth. And great times I had there too. And
you said that you remembered that there was a place where the village rubbish was buried.
Yes, when my auntie was saying here, when we look across at the golf course now, she said originally when these cottages were built, that it was landfill site behind, and then they filled all that in, and we had fields, and we had cows in the fields at the back and before the golf course, and we used to, because Mum had, as I say, had vegetables in the garden, and one day the cows stampeded, and I remember being in here saying, "Mum, the cows are eating all of our food and things." But they come in the garden and had to herd all the cows out back into the field.
So who would have owned the cows?
Again, I don't.
Would that be Old Manor Farm?
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was Old Manor Farm. Yeah.
You say that you remember, was it Father Taylor, the priest?
Peter Taylor.
Peter Taylor.
Yes, I remember him very well because his daughter was the same age as me, and we went to primary and secondary school together. I spent a lot of time with him. There was a slight controversy over his reign as priest, as he did run off with Sue May, the choir mistress.
Oh, wonderful!
No, he was a lovely. He was. I remember having a crush on him myself as a child. He was a very good-looking priest.
Right.
He really was. He was lovely. He was tall, blonde, very good-looking, and he had a real manner of making you feel, very welcome. The church was always full. It was always a full congregation in the church, and I had my place in the stall next to Peter, and I used to sing quite a lot of solos and things at weddings and things like that. But he always used to run all the choir to West Clarendon, because we used to do both churches' services on a Sunday, West and East.
Did he live at the old parsonage?
He lived in West Clarendon.
He moved to, no, you're right.
In that one, the house opposite the church there. So he lived there. But Sue lived in West Clarendon too. As I say, I mean, he did leave with the choir mistress. When I must have been I think I was probably about 15, 14, 15, because I was baptised and confirmed at the church too, whilst he was there.
What scandal in the
It
village.
was scandal, and I can never remember it as a child sort of thinking that, but they were such a lovely, I know it's wrong really, but they were such a nice couple. Between them they had seven children. She had 3 and he had 4. And so
so there must be a gap in the list of priests, because he would have had to have left.
Yes, he did. Yeah, it was a huge scandal at the time that the choir mistress run off with the priest.
So funny you went to Worthing where your grandma lived.
But Mrs. Boddy was the organist at the
She was
time.
the organist at that time. Yeah.
Yes, and again, I mean, she was fabulous. But I think the church helped me to sort of respect everybody and so forth, because we had the little community here and not so much in the village. But the church helped me mix more into the village, because a lot of the people that came in the congregation knew me and so forth. So there was a lot of people there, and I loved it, loved the church. And I think it's sad that the schools and churches aren't, mingled together as much now, which is quite sad, I think.
I suppose Sue Boddy would have taken over as choir mistress when Mrs. May left.
Yeah, she was a wonderful organist, Sue Boddy.
Was she?
And she was very strict, but always fair. She was somebody that you really respected. She was. You listened to. But I think that was true of, village life then. If somebody was older and telling you to do something or telling you off, you never answered back. But that's changed, I think, sadly.
Do you remember any of the festivals of the church? Do you remember Harvest Festival or anything like that?
Yeah, Harvest Festival was always attended very well, as the church services were, but that one especially would be overloaded, and all the food brought into the church. I do remember it was always a huge thing.
And a meal? Did you
Yeah,
have a meal?
they did, because as the choir, the vicar used to organise a meal sometimes, and I can remember going, not to everyone, but I can remember attending meals and so forth for that. Yeah.
And what about carol services and things like
Now,
that? Do you
carol
remember those?
services is the tradition that I love about Christmas. We used to really go round the village and sing, and knock on people's door and so forth and sing. And we always ended up at Hatchlands, where there was mulled wine and so forth available for the adults and so forth.
The carol singers went to Hatchlands?
Yes, we did. We always went carol singing around the village. And although I lived here, we never came up here. We always went around the village and ended up at Hatchlands, but we never carol sung along here.
But it would be the church choir that did the carol singing?
Yeah. Yes, it wasn't. I mean, festivals in the village, I remember we always used to have a bonfire night. Always.
Where?
And that was down on one of the farms in a field, just beyond where the shop used to be. But that was always an event where everybody went to bonfire night, because we never had fireworks or anything anywhere else. I have no idea who paid for it or did it, because I can never remember it being a paid thing. Everybody just went there.
We're talking about bonfire night, Caroline. What sort of time are we talking? What sort of date?
I think it would have been when I was around 9 or 10. I can remember then. Yeah, when
so
I
about
was at
71.
Yes,
72?
around there. Again, I don't know who organised it, but I can remember attending and so forth. And one year, a naughty boy actually tried to set light to all the fireworks at once. So there was a little bit of...
Did he stay in the village?
he did, but there were things like that.
And we're talking about the 70s when you went up to Hatchlands.
Yes.
For the carol singing.
Yes, and younger for that as well, because I can probably 8 or 9. Yeah, I can remember.
And did they do a Christmas party for the children at Hatchlands at that time?
I never remember going there, but I mean, again, it could have been from where I lived. I don't remember that. Was always welcomed into Lamford Cross for if there were parties, and was always given drink and biscuits if you were ever out and about in the village at Lamford Cross. You tended to call in there, and the ladies that worked in the kitchen would always give you milk and biscuits or squash and biscuits. It was one of the lovely things, going into a warm kitchen with an Aga, and you were accepted, and so forth.
Can you remember the village fete at all?
Yes, I used to love going to the village fete, and it was always a big occasion, held in different places. I remember, I believe it's the old parsonage, the one where I remember. It started there, and doing cakes and teas. It was never huge, but it was always pleasant and a good day. As a child, I can remember going there every year.
And well supported by the village?
Well supported by the village. Everybody used to go. And there was always fun things to do. And people used to bake cakes and guess the weight of the cakes, things like that used to happen, and sell raffle tickets, and it was a fun occasion, as was bonfire night and things as well.
We used to play games.
And you know, there would be all sorts of things there for you to do, but it was always well attended. I do remember. The other thing was the maypole dancing that we used to do at school. Maypole dancing was a huge thing, and Miss Mould would only have you do it exactly right, and never mess. You really did get into trouble if you didn't remember your steps for.
So this is in East
Clarendon, yeah. Unfortunately, when we went to West Clarendon, we never did it again. But East Clarendon had its own maypole, and it was always done, and you had to do it all properly.
So where would it be? Where would the maypole be?
It was in the playground. We used to
At
be
the
erected at the, in the playground, yeah. And we used to do it.
So when did you do it? for special events?
There was a lot of special events that we always did it, and so forth. So it was something that we all loved, and the teacher, the headmistress then, insisted that we all did. And did properly.
Did you have special things to wear?
We had bands that we used to wear around us, coloured bands, and we always used to have our hair, all the girls used to have their hair tied back, which I never did, but on these occasions I had to. Have your hair tied back, and it would always be girl, boy, all around there. But it was great fun. I remember doing that a lot. But something that didn't carry on at West Clarendon.
Caroline, this has been amazing. I don't know how long you stayed in the village. When you come back, is there anything particular that you notice that's different from when you were a child?
I think when I come back now and I walk around the village, I always go in the church. I have to go in the church. And I don't like the fact that it's locked, because I like to go in there just for 5 minutes peace, because unfortunately in 2004 as well I lost my brother, and he is buried in the village in the graveyard by the school, where he'd be most happy to be, because he loved village life, my brother. But I like to go to the church, and I don't like the fact that I can't always get in there.
That's sad, because it is actually supposed to be open.
You know, and
every day.
Yeah,
it's supposed to be open at 9 and closed at 5. So it must be very unfortunate that you've come in and it's been shut.
Yeah. So I mean, I always make a beeline to go there, and I like to walk around the village. Obviously, I go to see my brother's grave. But I often sit just in the park looking across to the school. My one thing I would love is to actually go back into the building of that school, because I'd love to look round there and remember how it was. Because I remember all floorboards and things like that, having polished floorboards in the school and
Perhaps
things.
we could arrange that. That would be so interesting.
I would love it. I would really love it. But the thing you mentioned, you said something about, you know, colours and things being dull. It was always quite, you know, the cottages were old and, like I said before, some scary that we used to avoid. But we used to walk around the back lane and spend a lot of time fishing in the pond at Hatchlands, and all our playtime was in the fields and things around the village. So I still like to go back, but it still seems quite quiet on days when I go back, as it was. But you don't see, like every time I come up here, the rec has never got children in. There's never anybody playing, whereas it always used to be full. You know, if you walked out down the road, you would always meet another child to play with, and the rec was our meeting place. But then we'd go off and walk across fields, and, you know. And how on earth, when we were children with no watches, we always knew when it was tea time. We were always back for that, because we never had microwaves warming up our dinners, but we were always back for that. But most of the time was out in the village.
And it was safe?
It was, because you had a village policeman, but above all, adults were aware that children were about, and because of the respect you had for adults, they watched out for you too. You know, and although politically, you know, we were brought up in council houses, and some people thought they were, you know, better off, you know, people did still watch out for you and knew, you know, that you were there. But it's quite quiet when I go back now. But I would still love to live here. I still feel that East Clarendon is a fantastic place to have been brought up as a child. And I would come back here at a moment if I could afford to live here. I would.
Caroline, you can remember Bobber Job Week. Do tell me about it.
Yeah, Bobber Job Week was, the Cubs used to do this once a week for fundraising and so forth. And you were to go around the village and knock on people's doors and ask if they had any particular jobs that you could carry out as children, from weeding or sweeping up or collecting things, maybe even a visit to the shop, the village shop or something like that, to collect something. And I can remember getting all the stones out of a flower bed for one person, and having to do that painstakingly, every single stone out of a flower bed and things like that. And people would give you cups of tea or a biscuit and squash and things when you were doing things for them. But we did it a lot. I was never a brownie because there weren't any close enough, but my brother was in the Cubs, so I used to go with him to do it.
So what was his uniform? What would he be?
He had grey shorts, green jumper, a yellow and green cap, and I can't remember, the woggles were a particular Cub colour for their particular pack, and he had a scarf and so forth. And then Mum would have to be sewing badges all up his jumper for when he got different badges, but he loved it. I don't think he ever went on into the Scouts, but the Cubs he enjoyed.
Who ran it?
There was, I remember somebody, Hamilton, was involved in the Cubs.
It would have been somebody in the village, presumably.
I'm not sure about that. I'm a bit vague on that, actually. I can't remember who did. I think it may have been, yeah, it may have been there. But, yeah, it was a good thing. And I never remember going to Scouts, but the Cubs he did, yeah. So
you were allowed to go too?
I was allowed to go with him on Bob Job Week, yes. But girls weren't allowed. I believe they are now, but you couldn't get into the Cubs for being a girl. But that was one of the other things that I remember doing. Again, I don't think children do it now because you wouldn't be allowed to knock on people's doors to do that.
But you obviously had very nice big brothers.
Yes, yes, I did. So it was another nice aspect to the village, really.
Great. I think you've said it all, Caroline. Thank you so much. That's a wonderful conclusion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.